Fantastic. Why don't you come and grab a seat? That would be great. So, as I said to you at the outset this morning, we're just going to spend a little bit of time doing a bit of thinking together. And as you can see from the screen here, we're going to carry on with this Sunday morning series that we've been doing. And we've been calling this series of talks Faith Story. And really what this is about is taking Bible characters. At the moment, we're sort of working our way through, sort of methodically through the Old Testament and spotting significant Bible characters and looking at a bit of their life, or sometimes the whole of their lives, and trying to figure out what their story, their faith story, would say to us. So, here we go. This is what we're on this morning. We're talking about, or we're going to be thinking about Esther and the hidden presence. That's not how you spell Esther, is it? Is that how you spell Esther? It's just that sometimes I have this deep insecurity over my spelling, and when I hear a little rumble after I put something on the screen, I thought, I bet I've spelt it wrong. Anyway, that's just me, just working out my therapy here this morning. Anyway, this is what we're looking at, Esther and the hidden presence. Esther is one of the kind of elite people, I suppose, one of around about 37 people who actually gets a book of the Bible named after her. So whether that's significant in terms of where you put this story or not, I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, that's just a useful fact. However, if you go and look at the book of Esther in the Old Testament, one of the fascinating facts, and I want you to check this out later, one of the fascinating facts about the book, the story of Esther, is that God isn't mentioned. Not once in the whole of the story. So that raises the question, well, why? I mean, there's kings mentioned, there's heroes mentioned, there's conspirators mentioned, there's all sorts of other people mentioned, friends, foes, all the rest of it, but God isn't mentioned not once. So where is he? Why is Esther's story even in the book if God isn't mentioned at all during the course of the story? Well, hold these questions, and I'm literally going to spend the majority of the chunk of my time telling you the story of Esther. So you're just going to have to, hopefully you're sitting there comfortably, still munching a biscuit, still got a bit of coffee left. But I'm going to talk our way through, or tell you the story, and we're going to binge 3 episodes all in one go. None of you good people, because you're very mature and know how to deal with your lives properly, never sit down on the sofa of an evening and start watching an episode and think, I'll watch another. And then you think, 11 o'clock, no, I'll watch another. None of you ever do that. But anyway, this morning, we're going to binge on 3 episodes. In fact, we're going to binge on the whole series in one go. And after episode 3, it comes to a dramatic finale. So watch out for that. So, episode 1. Episode 1 takes place in a place called Susa. So this is hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's a royal city in Persia, or the royal city of Persia back in the day. And it takes place when this chap, this is the representation of him, we don't really have a picture of him, but this will do. It takes place when Xerxes is on the throne. Now, you're really going to have to stick with me because I'm going to rush through some of these details. So, Xerxes is on the throne in Persia, and they've done a lot of conquering and all the rest of it. In fact, 100 years earlier to when Esther's story takes place, the Persians defeat the Babylonians. Because the Babylonians were the superpowers, and then the Persians came in, and then the Greeks came in, and then the Romans came in, and eventually the Americans came in. But these were the superpowers of the time. And the setting is 100 years after the Persians defeated the Babylonians. And one of the things that happened when the Persians defeated the Babylonians was captives that had been, people had been taken captive by the Babylonians, because that was their style. They would take captive a whole nation and ship them off deport them back to Babylonia and would make them serve the kingdom. But one of the things that had happened 100 years earlier was as the Persians came in, they said, you can go home. So went and looked at all sorts of different people. And of course, that involves the end of the exile period of the Jewish nation. And so many people, many Jewish people who were exiled in what was Babylon, and then was taken over in the Persian Empire, decided to go home. However, not everybody, because obviously some families had been living in exile for well over 100 years, and so new generations had grown up, they'd integrated into the society a little bit. So some of them didn't go back to the homeland. Some stayed in the Persian Empire, which is where our girl comes in to the story. So this is Esther. Esther is someone who's living in the city of Susa in the Persian Empire. And what happened was her family had been taken into exile, but then sadly her parents die, and she stays in Persia. But she's looked after by cousin Mordecai. Say Mordecai. You'll need to remember that name. So, meanwhile, back in the palace where King Xerxes is, he's having a drunken evening, as often kings do. Well, I'm not inferring anything or implying anything about present circumstances, but very often in the stories of old, kings have banquets and they get steaming drunk, and they just because they can, and then they say stupid stuff and they get themselves into trouble and all the rest of it. Anyway, it was one of those occasions for Xerxes, because he decides to say to his very beautiful queen to come and parade before his guests. Now, it's a bit kind of shady as to what exactly that means, but he wants her to come and strut her stuff in front of all presumably male guests. Her, being a strong woman, and quite right too, says, "No, I'm not going to do that, O mighty king, my husband." And whatever the previous circumstances were, he decides in his drunken stupor, she's out. So sadly, the present queen, present Mrs. Xerxes, seems to disappear off the scene. We're not really told whether she or just kind of is shoved off to the corner somewhere. But anyway, she ceases to be the queen. And so, and this is where the story, please forgive me, it's in the book. I didn't make this up. There are certainly aspects to this that the way we think these days is it's kind of inappropriate to the way that we would think how you do things, respect and all that sort of thing. Anyway, I'm just telling you the story. So Xerxes decides, I need a new wife. So he decides what he'll do is he'll put together a national beauty contest. And he decides that there must be thousands of beautiful prospective wives out there. So we're going to have national, local heats to this, and I'll send out people who will know what I'm looking for, and they'll decide on those who don't cut the mustard, and those who do. And so they whittled it down to a few hundred. You still with me? So they whittled it down, through this beauty process, down to a few. And cutting a little bit of a long story short, Esther's in this competition, and what do you know? She wins. Oh, come on. Okay, whether that's appropriate or not, I don't know. But anyway, this is poshed up Esther. And by the way, if you read the detail, even when she got into the final few, it literally says there that the finalists had to go through, I kid you not, a year of beautification before they actually were able then to go forward into the next round. We think that that's probably to do not just with kind of having nails done or whatever it might be constantly, but actually being schooled in the ways of the court as well. So you understood how to operate if you end up being queen. Anyway, she makes it. She becomes, most unlikely, she becomes the queen of Persia. The next, or new, Mrs. Xerxes. End of episode 1. So that's when the credits come up, and you go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay, go and put the kettle on, say, oh, shall I? Yeah, I'm going to do another episode. Okay, so episode 2. This one is called Mordecai. Remember him? Mordecai. So Mordecai is Esther's cousin, because remember, Esther was part of the Jewish remnant that remained in the Persian Empire. Her folks die, and our man Mordecai, cousin Mordecai, looks after Esther. Anyway, because Esther has become queen, most unexpectedly, I guess, she has a little bit of power building, and so cousin Mordecai gets a job, we think, within the palace. We assume that maybe Esther pulled a few strings, and so he comes into the sort of royal courts. And one day, literally, he's wandering around, as people do in the royal courts, and he hears some whispering behind some curtains, and he sort of sneaks around. Imagine it in your mind. He sneaks around, and he hears 2 people plotting for the death of Xerxes, the king. You're going to have to do this, folks, because I've got to just keep going, and I need the encouragement to know that you haven't just drifted off and sorry, right? What's for dinner? So anyway, so Mordecai overhears these 2 people trying to plot to kill King Xerxes. So, thank you. Yeah, you can overdo these things. Anyway, so Mordecai goes back to Esther, Queen Esther now, and says, Esther, I've just heard this happening. You need to tell the king that this is going on, because if you don't do something, they're going to do for the king. So Esther goes to the king, says, the friend Mordecai has just told me this, and there's a plot afoot. And sure enough, they investigate. They find out there is a plot afoot, and the plot is foiled. Now we're getting there. So the king, Xerxes, is incredibly grateful to Mordecai because he saved his life. Well, who wouldn't be grateful to someone to do that? And he decides in his mind, I'm going to reward this great man Mordecai, who seems to be related to my now wife. Seems like a nice chap. I'm going to do something for him. I wonder what it will be. I'll think about that later. But of course, he completely forgets with all the other stuff that's going on, another few banquets, another few drunken nights. Well, you do, don't you? Well, I assume I don't know that, obviously, but I assume that it messes with your mind. Anyway, he forgets about Mordecai and forgets to honor him in a particular way. Glass of water. Just stay there. Vodka, you think it is? Yes, could be so easily, might help. Anyway, meanwhile, as this episode 2 ends, now you need some sinister music here, but I don't know, or shadowy figure. You're right. Because this is the introduction of the bad baddie, and his name is Haman. And he's kind of been lurking, as baddies do, in the background. And he's watching what's going on. He's, what happens eventually is, he's kind of, there's something not right about him as he looks around the place. So that's how episode 2 ends. And you think, episode 3, one more. Oh, who cares? I'm enjoying this. Let's just do it. A third cup of tea. or coffee or vodka or whatever you want. Anyway, episode 3, and this is kind of hurtling towards the climax of the story. This is where it all comes together, all the threads and different people and so on and so forth. And we can call episode 3 the good stuff wins. Absolutely, there you go. So, it begins, though, with the shadowy figure. Oh, dear. Why did I do this? I really don't know. Anyway, it starts with the shadowy figure, not just lurking, but coming center stage to the whole story. And who is this Haman? Well, apart from being, I won't mention it because John will say boo, so I'm just not going to say bad baddie again. Oh, did it. He's a high-ranking home affairs official in Xerxes' palace, in his Persian kingdom. He's slippery, he's ambitious, he's a manipulator, and what do you know? He sadly is extremely anti-Semitic. He hates all Jewish people. And he hates Mordecai in particular. They just don't get on. Mordecai won't bow to him. I think Mordecai has got him down already, and Haman knows that Mordecai has got the inside line on him. And this pesky Jewish settler, he has very bad thoughts about him indeed, and in fact, he decides he's going to kill him as soon as he possibly can. And in fact, the detail there is that he gets, this then decides whether it's what rating this whole thing is. He decides to get a tree trunk, sharpen the tip, and he decides one morning he's going to impale the man on this pole. Pretty horrible. That's what he has in mind for Mordecai. But not only that, as I've said already, he absolutely knows how to pull the king's strings. He's got this kind of, as often these shady behind-the-scenes characters in politics, and maybe there's some people you can think of in recent politics who might be the kind of power behind the throne, the person who's messing with the head of the person in charge and is whispering little things about people and situations to the person in charge. And that's exactly what Haman does to Xerxes. He comes to him one day, "O Lord, worshipful king, I have come across a grievous group of people in your kingdom who are plotting to overthrow you, and if we don't do something about these evil people who were brought in by the Babylonians years ago, but there's still a few of them hanging around, and they're trouble. I'm telling you, king, they are trouble. And so what you need to do, king, to save your kingdom and all your family, who surely you love, from these people who are out to get you, absolutely certain they are, what you need to do is exterminate every last one of them, O king." So the king, being, 16 banquets short of a whatever, says, "If you say so, Haman, I trust your judgment. You're the man who watches out for these things. And so I, Xerxes, will pronounce a decree that all Jewish people in the land will be destroyed and got rid of on a certain date." And there was a specific date. And so he said, spread that out across the land. And so that's what happens. So now the Hebrew people in the land of Persia, or the area of Persia, are deeply under threat. And there's a decree for the genocide of them all. Now, of course, Mordecai, being in the court environs, hears about this plan, hears about this decree. In fact, actually, this decree slips out right across the land because people are being told that this has happened, presumably to encourage people to clear out. If you want to live, you clear out. Sounds kind of familiar in history, doesn't it, if you think about it? Certainly pre-Second World War. But anyway, Mordecai sees that the only hope that the Jewish people have is that, so he decides that he needs to go and convince Queen Esther to go to her husband, Xerxes, and convince him that this just cannot happen, that this is an evil, evil thing, that actually she would plead the case with her husband. And so this, again, I would like, if we had time, we would read the detail of what it says about this. But this is an incredibly dangerous thing for her to do. Because although she is his favorite queen, to go to the king and say, oh, you know that decree that you've gone public on and you've said, yeah, this is what we're doing, would you just consider overturning that because I'm asking you to, O king? Normally that's the sort of thing that there would now be a third Mrs. Xerxes competition very quickly because she's challenged the authority of the king. So it's an incredibly dangerous thing that Mordecai is asking Esther, Queen Esther, to do. But she considers it. So we're reaching the breathtaking season finale now. Are you ready for this? Here we go. So what happens is that she goes to the king and says she has a request. So she breathes in, says, I've got to do this. She goes to the king and says, I have a request. And he's because she is clearly his favorite, he says, well, what is your request? Anything. And she says, tell you what, I'm going to put together a banquet. Now, we know Xerxes likes banquets. So she also knows how to work this fella. As some people in our lives know how to work us and get the things out of us, perhaps, that we might normally do, but because of them, and so on and so forth. So anyway, she does that thing. And he says, yes, of course. You come to the banquet and you tell me what it is that you want. You're clearly troubled about something. You just have to ask, but we'll wait for the banquet. And she says, do you know what? Why don't we just have a really, really, really intimate banquet this time around? In fact, why don't we just have the three of us? You, King, me, Esther, and your, Haman. Let's bring him in. Just the three of us. You like Haman. You trust Haman. Let's bring him into this little banquet. And at the banquet, I will tell you what my request is. Can you feel the cliffhanger? I'll start again. So the cliffhanger's right there. So she invites hang on, I've gone too far ahead. Wait a minute, sorry, I knew this would happen. Back. Oh, there's and then there was... Right, so the banquet. There we go. So there's the banquet. And I'm going to read to you, because I haven't read any of this story to you, and I want to. Now, just hang in there. Remember, the majority of this talk is what I've already done, all right? But I'm going to read to you what happens when this little intimate banquet, as the lights go low across the land, as the candelabras are lit in this little intimate space, as the servants shuffle around and create a lovely table for the three. And this is how it goes, which is Esther 7, if you're interested. So, the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, vodka, that day, the king again asked her, tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you. Obviously, he had a few already. I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom, he says to her. And so Queen Esther looks him in the eye and replies, if your majesty is pleased with me and wants to grant my request, my petition is that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. Remember, he doesn't know that she's part of the Hebrew people. I don't know how she kept it secret. She doesn't know that. The king doesn't know that Mordecai is part of this threatened nation. My petition is that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If only we'd been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would have been a matter too trivial to warrant disturbing the king. Who would do such a thing? King Xerxes demanded. Who would dare touch you, Esther? Esther replied, this wicked Haman is our enemy. Haman, as you can imagine, grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. But Haman stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that he was doomed. In despair, he fell on the couch where Esther, bad thing to do, by the way. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining just as the king returned from the palace garden. Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes? The king roared, no, I'm not doing that. As soon as the king spoke, his attendant covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Then Habona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, Haman has set up a gallows pole, pointy pole, that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it for Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. Oh, yeah, I forgot about him. I really wanted to really honor him. He's a good bloke, isn't he, Haman? Then here's what we're going to do. Stick Haman on it instead of Mordecai. And the king's anger was pacified. On the same day, King Xerxes gave the estate of Haman, the baddie, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king. This is usually the bit at the end when it's all, all the banquets in there. There's writing at the end, It kind of tidies things up that they ran out of money and time to put in the actual episode. Anyway, then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king how they were related. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. The end. And as far as we know, they all lived happily ever after. Well, there are a few other details that you need to know that actually it was a bit tricky to get the whole let's kill all the Jews things out the way, and for Xerxes to save face, because kings don't generally overturn decrees, because even with the best wife in the world, it's difficult to do that sort of stuff and look like you're still the king. So they found a way around it, and at the end of the day, all the Jewish remnant were okay, and it did work out all right in the end. So, back to and rounding things off, as I mentioned, it's a great, honestly, go read it. It's a great story. I am really surprised Netflix has not got hold of this story. It's that good. But anyway, there's no mention of God. Not once. God isn't mentioned once. So why then? Oh, yeah, sorry, that's him. Oh, yeah, okay. So why is it in the book? Why is this story, great though it is, entertaining though it is, informative though it is, why is it in the book? Well, of course, the truth of the matter is clearly Esther and Mordecai are people of faith. That's assumed. It's underneath the surface. It's something that really the original writer and the people who were originally reading it wouldn't have had to have had it explained, oh, by the way, they believed in God. or, they're people of faith. So clearly they're people of faith. But even with that, there's very little Shazam. There's very little, and God said to Moses, stand on the edge, bang the stick on the edge, and the waves will part, and you will cross, which is an amazing aspect of God, and it's in there in the Old Testament again and again and again. It's just not in Esther. There's no march around the walls, blow trumpets, and the walls will come tumbling down. There's not that as well. It's in the book. These things happen, but it's just not in Esther. There's no kind of big, obvious miracle, God says, God did, any of that sort of thing on. So why is it in the book? Well, this is the thing. It's there. Even in, this is the odd thing. It's even in people who are clearly not God believers, who are clearly very evil, despotic, difficult people who haven't owned the name of God, or in our generation aren't owning revelation of God through Jesus. There's none of that in him, but there seems to be the explanation. And this is why I think it's helpful for us, and that's why I've taken all this time to do this to you this morning. I think, in a strange sort of way, it's more like the lives we actually live. We all want the miraculous, don't we? Hands up those who don't want any miracles in their life ever. No one. Hands up those, that would work for me. Yeah, exactly. So let's not play games here. We want God to do that Shazam, that kind of change this, God, intervene, change the situation, make this right, etc., etc. We want God's obvious presence. But what this story shows is just because you can't see it doesn't mean to say that God's presence isn't there, which is why I've called this morning's talk God's hidden presence. And I think the power of this story is that because God is so powerful, he doesn't even need to be mentioned. Because his presence is utterly, completely there, even working through the likes of Xerxes of Persia. And as I finish off, I want you to think about your life story, your faith story at the moment. And maybe what you really would like. Honestly, we've been honest with each other. We would really like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, this afternoon would do, something to be moved out the way, something to be changed, something to be dramatically revealed, to be God's hand there in our lives. And by the way, you absolutely can pray for that stuff. Jesus told us to. So of course you can pray that God would take it away, that God would change it and so on. But don't be fooled that if it's still there come Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that God somehow isn't there. His presence might be a little bit more hidden, but he is utterly involved, friends, in the warp and the weave of your lives and in the lives of those you love. Whether you can see it, whether it jumps out at you or not, God's hand is at work. And that's the story of Esther. So there's I haven't read this to you almost deliberately, because whenever anyone speaks on Esther, they always pick this phrase. I've left it right to the end. There's a moment where Mordecai is convincing Esther, you've got to go and speak to the king. And he's saying, well, look, he doesn't say it, but it's like he's saying, well, maybe God has maneuvered all this stuff for such a time as this, that you, Esther, are the queen of the whole of Persia for just such a time as this. Why are you alive? I mean, you, all of us. Why are you alive? Could it be, even this week, that it's for such a time as this? That, as Romans 8 says, all things work together for the good of those who love God and are in Christ Jesus. Even when we don't see it. Even when it feels like the baddie is really on the rise in our lives. And it's right on the cusp of it all going very badly wrong, and yet you are here for such a time as this. And I think in our world, and with this I'll finish, the church is here for such a time as this. Whatever your political persuasion, whatever you think about what's going on in the world, we are here as the followers of Jesus for such a time as this. Will we always see what we pray for happen in our nation, in local politics or whatever it might be? Well, maybe not, but where is God positioning us? What is God doing through us? Maybe this is why I went to the theater last night. Maybe you can tell. I saw an absolutely superb play at the National Theatre called Nye. And it was about Nye Bevan. Ever heard of him? Some have, some haven't. Nye Bevan was the person who fought against all odds and achieved the National Health Service. And Rhiannon was very pleased to be at this play because, quite rightly, Nye Bevan was extremely well. And, but kind of complicated man, very complicated man. Was he always right? No, not at all. Kind of all sorts of things going on. But could it be that the miracle that is the National Health Service, whatever condition it's in now, and whatever it could be, the miracle of the National Health Service, God somehow was maneuvering the things of politics, the things of power play, the breaking of strongholds that held the poor down, that meant that people couldn't get the basic things they needed. And incredibly, and I think miraculously, the National Health Service emerged. There's just one example of what I'm talking about, whether it's personal this week, or whether as you look at your phone, read the newspaper, watch the news and so on, and feeling, oh, really? The church for such a time as this. Why don't we stand? I'm done. Please go and read this story and kind of read it with those kind of spectacles of interpretation on. But let's sing. I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray over whatever your situation is right now, whatever you're needing to believe God, whether he shows himself actively or not. I'm going to pray that God would be sovereign over our circumstances. Lord, your word says that all things work together for good for those who love you. And some of us really would like to see some more good happening. But I want to pray as we go off this morning, I pray that you would raise our faith to believe that you are God, you are sovereign, you are powerfully involved in our little lives and the lives of our nation and our world. You have not let go. You have not fallen asleep on your watch. You are thoroughly involved, and you are sovereign over it all. So, Lord, as we stand here, we ask humbly before you that you would pour out your Spirit on us, that we would raise our eyes again towards you, believe again, have the energy, the faith, the hope to believe that this week we will see something different, that we would believe despite it all. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the way that it reads us like a book, really. May you be glorified through us and through your church in the days of this week, we ask in Jesus' name.